The Babylonians, in their popular religion, supremely worshipped a goddess mother and a son, who was represented in pictures and in images as an infant or child in his mother's arms. From Babylon, this worship of the mother and the child spread to the ends of the earth. In Egypt, the mother and the child were worshipped under the names of Isis and Osiris. In India, even to this day, as 𝗖𝘆𝗰𝗲𝗍 and 𝗖𝘆𝗰𝗲𝗍. In Asia, as 𝗧𝗵𝗍 and 𝗑𝑑𝑒us. In pagan Rome, as Fortuna and 𝗧𝗆𝗱𝗄𝗆, or Jupiter, the boy. In Greece, as Ceres, the great mother, with the babe at her breast, or as Irene, the goddess of peace, with the boy Plutus in her arms. And even in Tibet, in China, and Japan, the Jesuit missionaries were astonished to find the counterpart of Madonna and her child as devoutly worshipped as in papal Rome itself. 𝗍𝗆, the Holy Mother in China, being represented with a child in her arms and a glory around her, exactly as if a Roman Catholic artist had been employed to set her up. The very name by which the Italians commonly designate the Virgin is just a translation of one of the titles of the Babylonian goddess. As Baal or Belus was the name of the great male divinity of Babylon, so the female divinity was called Beltis. This name has been found in Nineveh, applied to the mother of the gods, and in a speech attributed to Nebuchadnezzar, preserved in 𝗧𝗍𝗆𝗄𝗆𝗍𝗆𝗃𝗍𝗄𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 great Babylonian god and goddess. The Greek Belus, as representing the highest title of the Babylonian god, was undoubtedly Baal, the lord. Beltis, therefore, as the title of the female divinity, was equivalent to 𝗏𝗁𝗱, which, in English is my lady, in Latin, mi domina, and, in Italian, is corrupted into the well-known Madonna. In connection with this, it may be observed that the name of Juno, the classical Queen of Heaven, which, in Greek, was Hera, also signified the lady, and that the peculiar title of Cybele or Rhea at Rome was Domina or the lady. Further, there is strong reason to believe that Athena, the well-known name of Minerva at Athens, had the very same meaning. The Hebrew or dong, the Lord, is, with the points, pronounced Othon. We have evidence that this name was known to the Asiatic Greeks, from whom idolatry, in a large measure, came into European Greece, as a name of God under the form of Athon. 𝗧𝗿𝗍𝗶𝘁𝗍, in a note on the Periegesis of Dionysius, speaking of local names in the district of Laodicea, says that Athon is God. The feminine of Athon, the Lord, is Athana, the lady, which in the Attic dialect is Athena, no doubt. Minerva is commonly represented as a virgin, but, for all that, we learn from Strabo that at 𝗖𝗆𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗱 in Crete, the coins of which city, says Muller, Dorians, have the Athenian symbols of Minerva upon them, she was said to be the mother of the Corybantes by Helios, or the sun. Even where the sun was the favorite object of worship, as in Babylon itself and elsewhere, at this festival he was worshipped not merely as the orb of day, but as God incarnate. It was an essential principle of the Babylonian system that the sun or Baal was the one only God. When, therefore, Thomas was worshipped as God incarnate, that implied also that he was an incarnation of the sun. The worship of Baal and Astarte was very early introduced into Britain, along with the Druids, the priests of the groves. Some have imagined that the Druidical worship was first introduced by the Phoenicians, who, centuries before the Christian era, traded to the tin mines of Cornwall. But the unequivocal traces of that worship found in regions of the British Islands, where the Phoenicians never penetrated, and it has everywhere left indelible marks of the strong hold which it must have had on the early British mind. From Baal, the 1st of May it's still called Beltane in the almanac, and we have customs still lingering at this day among us, which prove how exactly the worship of Baal, or Moloch, for both titles belonged to the same god, had been observed even in the northern parts of this island. The late Lady Baird, of Fern Tower, in Perthshire, says a writer in Notes and Queries, thoroughly versed in British antiquities, told me that every year, at Beltane, or the 1st of May. A number of men and women assemble at an ancient druidical circle of stones on her property near 𝗏𝗏. They light a fire in the center. Each person puts a bit of oat cake in a shepherd's bonnet. They all sit down and draw blindfold a piece from the bonnet. One piece has been previously blackened, and whoever gets that piece has to jump through the fire in the center of the circle and pay a forfeit. This is, in fact, a part of the ancient worship of Baal, and the person on whom the lot fell was previously burnt as a sacrifice. Now, the passing through the fire represents that, and the payment of the forfeit redeems the victim. If Baal was thus worshipped in Britain, it will not be difficult to believe that his consort Astarte was also adored by our ancestors, and that from Astarte, whose name in Nineveh was Ishtar, the religious solemnities of April, as now practiced, are called by the name of Easter. That month, among our pagan ancestors, having been called 𝗧𝗍𝗍𝗱𝗍𝗶, the festival, of which we read in church history, under the name of Easter, in the 3rd or 4th centuries, was quite a different festival from that now observed in the Romish Church, and at that time was not known by any such name as Easter. Before Christianity entered the British Isles, the pagan festival of the 24th of June was celebrated among the Druids by blazing fires in honor of their great divinity, who, as we have already seen, was Baal. These midsummer fires and sacrifices, says Toland, in his account of the Druids, were intended to obtain a blessing on the fruits of the earth, now becoming ready for gathering, as those of the 1st of May, that they might prosperously grow, and those of the last of October were a thanksgiving for finishing the harvest again. Speaking of the druidical fires at midsummer, he thus proceeds. To return to our cairnfires, it was customary for the lord of the place, or his son, or some other person of distinction, to take the entrails of the sacrificed animals in his hands, and, walking barefoot over the coals thrice after the flames had ceased, to carry them straight to the druid, who waited in a whole skin at the altar. If the nobleman escaped harmless, it was reckoned a good omen, welcomed with loud acclamations, but if he received any hurt, it was deemed unlucky both to the community and himself. In the worship of Baal, as practiced by the idolatrous Israelites in the days of their apostasy, the worship of the sun's image was equally observed, and it is striking to find that the image of the sun, which apostate Israel worshipped, was erected above the altar. When the good King Josiah set about the work of reformation, we read that his servants in carrying out the work proceeded thus, to Chronicles 34:4, and they break down the altars of Baalim in his presence, and the images that were on high above them he cut down. From all this, it is manifest that the image of the sun above, or on the altar, was one of the recognized symbols of those who worshipped Baal or the sun, and here, in a so-called Christian church, a brilliant plate of silver, in the form of a sun, is so placed on the altar, that everyone who adores at that altar must bow down in lowly reverence before that image of the sun. Whence, I ask, could that have come, but from the ancient sun worship, or the worship of Baal? And when the wafer is so placed that the silver sun is fronting the round wafer, whose roundness is so important an element in the Romish mystery, what can be the meaning of it, but just to show to those who have eyes to see, that the wafer itself is only another symbol of Baal, or the sun. If the sun divinity was worshipped in Egypt as the seed, or in Babylon as the corn, precisely so is the wafer adored in Rome. Bread corn of the elect, have mercy upon us, is one of the appointed prayers of the Roman litany, addressed to the wafer, in the celebration of the Mass, and one at least of the imperative requirements as to the way in which that wafer is to be partaken of, is the very same as was enforced in the old worship of the Babylonian divinity. The sun, as the great source of light and heat, was worshipped under the name of Baal. Now, the fact that the sun under that name was worshipped in the earliest ages of the world shows the audacious character of these first beginnings of apostasy. Men have spoken as if the worship of the sun and of their heavenly bodies was a very excusable thing, into which the human race might very readily and very innocently fall. But how stands the fact? According to the primitive language of mankind, the sun was called Shemesh, that is, the servant, that name, no doubt, being divinely given, to keep the world in mind of the great truth that, however glorious was the orb of day, it was, after all, the appointed minister of the bounty of the great unseen Creator to his creatures upon earth. Men knew this, and yet with the full knowledge of it, they put the servant in the place of the master, and called the sun Baal, that is, the Lord, and worshipped him accordingly. The beginning, then, of sun worship, and of the worship of the host of heaven, was a sin against the light, a presumptuous, heaven-daring sin. As the sun in the heavens was the great object of worship, so fire was worshipped as its earthly representative. Zoroaster was not only the head of the Chaldean mysteries, but, as all admit, the head of the fire worshippers. The title given to Nimrod, as the first of the Babylonian kings, by Berosus, indicates the same thing. That title is Aloris, that is, the god of fire, as Nimrod, the god of fire, was Morgeba, or the mighty king, inasmuch as he was the first who was called Moloch, or king, and the first who began to be mighty, Geba, on the earth. We see at once how it was that the passing through the fire to Moloch originated, and how the god of fire among the Romans came to be called Morgeba. It was only after his death, however, that he appears to have been deified. Then, retrospectively, he was worshipped as the child of the sun, or the Son incarnate. In his own lifetime, however, he set up no higher pretensions than that of being Balkon, or priest of Baal, from which the other name of the Roman fire god, Vulcan, is evidently derived. It will be observed, however, that the great red dragon, or great fiery serpent, is represented as standing before the woman with the crown of 12 stars, that is, the true church of God, to devour her child as soon as it should be born. Now, this is in exact accordance with the character of the great head of the system of fire worship, Nimrod, as the representative of the devouring fire to which human victims, and especially children, were offered in sacrifice, was regarded as the great child devourer. Though, at his first deification, he was set up himself as Ninus, or the child, yet, as the first of mankind that was deified, he was, of course, the actual father of all the Babylonian gods, and, therefore, in that character, he was afterwards universally regarded. As the father of the gods, he was, as we have seen, called Kronos. And everyone knows that the classical story of Kronos was just this, that he devoured his sons as soon as they were born. Such is the analogy between type and antitype. This legend has a further and deeper meaning, but, as applied to Nimrod, or the Horned One, it just refers to the fact that, as the representative of Moloch or Baal, infants were the most acceptable offerings at his altar. We have ample and melancholy evidence on this subject from the records of antiquity. The Phoenicians, says Eusebius, every year sacrificed their beloved and only begotten children to Kronos or Saturn, and the Rhodians also often did the same. Diodorus Siculus states that the Carthaginians, on one occasion, when besieged by the Sicilians, and sore pressed, in order to rectify, as they supposed, their error in having somewhat departed from the ancient custom of Carthage, in this respect, hastily chose out 200 of the noblest of their children, and publicly sacrificed them to this god. There is reason to believe that the same practice is obtained in our own land in the times of the Druids. We know that they offered human sacrifices to their bloody gods. We have evidence that they made their children pass through the fire to Moloch, and that makes it highly probable that they also offered them in sacrifice. For, from Jeremiah 31:35, compared with Jeremiah 19:5, we find that these two things were parts of one and the same system. The god whom the Druids worshipped was Baal, as the blazing Baal fires show, and the last cited passage proves that children were offered in sacrifice to Baal. When the fruit of the body was thus offered, it was for the sin of the soul. And it was a principle of the Mosaic law, a principle no doubt derived from the patriarchal faith, that the priest must partake of whatever was offered as a sin offering. Numbers 18:9-10. Hence, the priests of Nimrod, or Baal, were necessarily required to eat of the human sacrifices, and thus it has come to pass that Baal, the priest of Baal, is the established word in our own tongue for a devourer of human flesh. From the historian Castor, in Armenian translation of Eusebius, we learn that it was under Baal, or Belus, that is Baal, that the Cyclops lived, and the scholiast on Alscholus states that these Cyclops were the brethren of Kronos, who was also Baal or Baal, as we have elsewhere seen. The eye in their forehead shows that originally this name was a name of the great god, for that eye in India and Greece is found the characteristic of the supreme divinity. The Cyclops, then, had been representatives of that god, in other words, priests, and priests of Baal or Baal. Now, we find that the Cyclops were well known as cannibals, veritas 𝗧𝗆𝗆𝗶𝗁𝗆, to bring back the rights of the Cyclops, meaning to revive the practice of eating human flesh. But the serpent, of which there is a double representation, is unquestionably the serpent of Aesculapius. The fly-destroying swallow, therefore, must represent the same divinity. Now, everyone knows what was the name by which the Lord of the Fly, or fly-destroying god of the Oriental world was called. It was Beelzebub. This name, as signifying Lord of the Fly, to the profane meant only the power that destroyed the swarms of flies when these became, as they often did in hot countries, a source of torment to the people whom they invaded. But this name, as identified with the serpent, clearly reveals itself as one of the distinctive names of Satan. And how appropriate is this name, when its mystic or esoteric meaning is penetrated? What is the real meaning of this familiar name? Beelzebub just means the restless lord, even that unhappy one who goeth to and fro in the earth, and walketh up and down in it, who goeth through dry places seeking rest, and finding none. From all this, the inference is unavoidable that Satan, in his own proper name, must have been the great god of their secret and mysterious worship, and this accounts for the extraordinary mystery observed on the subject. When, therefore, Gratian abolished the legal provision for the support of the fire worship and serpent worship of Rome, we see how exactly the divine prediction was fulfilled. Revelation 12:9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Now, as the pagan pontifex, to whose powers and prerogatives the Pope had served himself heir, was thus the high priest of Satan, so, when the Pope entered into a league and alliance with that system of devil worship, and consented to occupy the very position of that pontifex, and to bring all its abominations into the Church, as he has done, he necessarily became the prime minister of the devil, and, of course, came as thoroughly under his power as ever the previous pontiff had been. How exact the fulfillment of the divine statement that the coming of the man of sin was to be, after the working or energy of Satan. Here, then, is the grand conclusion to which we are compelled, both on historical and scriptural grounds, to come, as the mystery of godliness is God manifest in the flesh, so the mystery of iniquity is, so far as such a thing is possible, the devil incarnate. Rome is the apocalyptic Babylon. Is there one who will venture to deny that? From the foundation to the topmost stone, it is essentially a system of paganism. Let every Christian henceforth and forever treat it as an outcast from the pale of Christianity. Instead of speaking of it as a Christian church, let it be recognized and regarded as the mystery of iniquity, yea, as the very synagogue of Satan. This Babylonian queen was not merely in character coincident with the Aphrodite of Greece and the Venus of Rome, but was, in point of fact, the historical original of that goddess, that by the ancient world was regarded as the very embodiment of everything attractive in female form, and the perfection of female beauty. For Sonchiniathan assures us that Aphrodite, or Venus, was identical with Astarte, and Astarte being interpreted is none other than the woman that made towers, or encompassing walls, i.e. Semiramis. The Roman Venus, as is well known, was the Cyprian Venus, and the Venus of Cyprus is historically proved to have been derived from Babylon. In ancient times, eggs were used in the religious rites of the Egyptians and the Greeks, and were hung up for mystic purposes in their temples. From Egypt these sacred eggs can be distinctly traced to the banks of the Euphrates. The classic poets are full of the fable of the mystic egg of the Babylonians, and thus its tale is told by Hyginus, the Egyptian, the learned keeper of the Palatine Library at Rome, in the time of Augustus, who was skilled in all the wisdom of his native country. An egg of wondrous size is said to have fallen from heaven into the river Euphrates. The fishes rolled it to the bank, where the doves having settled upon it, and hatched it, out came Venus, who afterwards was called the Syrian goddess, that is, Astarte. Hence the egg became one of the symbols of Astarte or Easter, and accordingly, in Cyprus, one of the chosen seats of the worship of Venus, or Astarte, the egg of wondrous size was represented on a grand scale. The occult meaning of this mystic egg of Astarte, in one of its aspects, for it had a twofold significance, had reference to the ark, during the time of the flood, in which the whole human race were shut up, as the chick is enclosed in the egg before it is hatched. If any be inclined to ask, how could it ever enter the minds of men to employ such an extraordinary symbol for such a purpose? The answer is, first, the sacred egg of paganism, as already indicated, is well known as the mundane egg, that is, the egg in which the world was shut up. Now the world has two distinct meanings. It means either the material earth, or the inhabitants of the earth. The doves resting on the egg need no explanation. This, then, was the meaning of the mystic egg in one aspect. As, however, everything that was good or beneficial to mankind was represented in the Chaldean mysteries, as in some way connected with the Babylonian goddess, so the greatest blessing to the human race, which the ark contained in its bosom, was held to be Astarte, who was the great civilizer and benefactor of the world. Though the deified queen, whom Astarte represented, had no actual existence till some centuries after the flood, yet through the doctrine of metempsychosis, which was firmly established in Babylon, it was easy for her worshippers to be made to believe that, in a previous incarnation, she had lived in the antediluvian world, and passed in safety through the waters of the flood. Now the Romish Church adopted this mystic egg of Astarte, and consecrated it as a symbol of Christ's resurrection. But upon more searching inquiry, it turns out that the Riemann or pomegranate had reference to an entirely different thing. Astarte, or Cybele, was called also 𝗖𝗍𝗱𝗍𝗶𝗁, and the sacred mount in Phrygia, most famed for the celebration of her mysteries, was named Mount Ida, that is, in Chaldee, the sacred language of these mysteries, the Mount of Knowledge. 𝗖𝗍𝗱𝗍𝗶, then, signifies the mother of knowledge. In other words, our Mother Eve, who first coveted the knowledge of good and evil, and actually purchased it at so dire a price to herself and to all her children. Astarte, as can be abundantly shown, was worshipped not only as an incarnation of the Spirit of God, but also of the mother of mankind, when, therefore, the mother of the gods, and the mother of knowledge, was represented with the fruit of the pomegranate in her extended hand, inviting those who ascended the sacred mount to initiation in her mysteries. Can there be a doubt what that fruit was intended to signify? Evidently, it must accord with her assumed character. It must be the fruit of the tree of knowledge, the fruit of that very tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world, and all our woe. The knowledge to which the votaries of the Idaean goddess were admitted was precisely of the same kind as that which Eve derived from the eating of the forbidden fruit, the practical knowledge of all, that was morally evil and base, yet to Astarte. In this character, men were taught to look at their grand benefactress as gaining for them knowledge, and blessings connected with that knowledge, which otherwise they might in vain have sought from him, who is the Father of lights, from whom cometh down every good and perfect gift. Popery inspires the same feeling in regard to the Romish Queen of Heaven, and leads its devotees to view the sin of Eve in much the same light as that in which paganism regarded it. In the canon of the Mass, the most solemn service in the Romish Missal, the following expression occurs, where the sin of our first parent is apostrophized: O 𝗖𝗆𝗱𝗱𝗶𝗁 Redemptorum, O blessed fault, which didst procure such a Redeemer. The idea contained in these words is purely pagan. They just amount to this: thanks be to Eve, to whose sin we are indebted for the glorious Saviour. Thus the pagans had an historical foundation for their myth of the dove resting on the symbol of the ark in the Babylonian waters, and the Syrian goddess, or Astarte, the same as Astrea, coming forth from it. Semiramis, then, as Astarte, worshipped as the dove, was regarded as the incarnation of the Spirit of God, as Baal, Lord of Heaven, had his visible emblem, the sun, so she, as Beltis, Queen of Heaven, must have hers also, the moon, which in another sense was Astarte, the maker of revolutions, for there is no doubt that tart very commonly signifies going round. But, fourth, the whole system must be dovetailed together. As the mother of the gods was equally the mother of mankind, Semiramis, or Astarte, must also be identified with Eve, and the name Rhea, which, according to the Paschal Chronicle, Volume 1, page 65, was given to her, sufficiently proves her identification with Eve, as applied to the common mother of the human race. The name Astarte is singularly appropriate. For, as she was 𝗖𝗆𝗱𝗱𝗍𝗔, the mother of knowledge, the question is, how did she come by that knowledge? To this the answer can only be, by the fatal investigation she made. It was a tremendous experiment she made, when, in opposition to the divine command, and in spite of the threatened penalty, she ventured to search into that forbidden knowledge which her Maker, in his goodness, had kept from her. Thus she took the lead in that unhappy course of which the Scripture speaks: God made man upright, but they have sought out many inventions. Ecclesiastes 7:29. Now Semiramis, deified as the dove, was Astarte in the most gracious and benignant form.